Mike Calvert was one of the most unorthodox officers in the British Army in Burma. Nicknamed Mad Mike, I shall be exploring his incredible service in the British Army. Born in Rohtak, India in 1913, Calvert's father worked for the Indian Civil Service. He was educated back in England at Bradfield College and then at the Royal Military Academy in Woolwich until he commissioned in the Royal Engineers in 1933. During his early years in the army, he boxed and became the army middleweight champion. Calvert served in the Far East before the war, and he saw firsthand Japanese atrocities against the Chinese, as he came across many who fled the city of Nanking after the Japanese laid waste to the city. At the start of the Second World War, Calvert took part in the failed defence of Norway, commanding a detachment of Royal Engineers. After spending some time in the United Kingdom and Australia teaching demolition techniques to troops, Calvert found himself at the Bush Warfare School in Burma, teaching soldiers guerrilla warfare. It was here in Burma that he met Ord Wingate, the famed leader of the Chindits. The two became fast friends, and Calvert was one of the few men to whom Wingate gave his full attention to. Calvert joined the Chindits when they were formed and took part in the unit's first operation, codenamed Loincloth. During the operation, the Chindits split into different columns, numbering around 340 men each. Each column was strong enough to attack and defend itself against the Japanese, but small enough to disappear into the jungle and be able to conceal itself if needed. The columns would also combine themselves to create a larger force to take on bigger Japanese targets. Calvert and his column performed admirably in the operation, and he was awarded the Distinguished Service Order, as his column caused the most amount of damage to Japanese positions and communication networks. They destroyed 2 bridges with no casualties sustained, and despite the testing conditions, they also made it back with the least amount of casualties overall. Calvert then took part in the second Chindit operation, codenamed Operation Thursday, taking command of the 77th Infantry Brigade. His unit landed in gliders deep in the Japanese rear, and set about harassing the Japanese, who sent a full division to counter the Chindits. This backfired for the Japanese, however, as they suffered heavy casualties and failed to overrun the Chindit positions. Calvert's force set up a defensive position nicknamed White City. Here they set up a defensive box and held their position for over 2 months against overwhelming Japanese troops. The position was key as they cut off crucial rail and road communications, hindering the Japanese further. With the death of Wingate at the end of March 44, just weeks into the operation, the Chindits faced an uncertain future, and one that wasn't helped by their placement under the command of the American Joseph Stilwell. Stilwell ordered Calvert's brigade to take Mogaung, but his brigade was in a bad way. Many of the men had one or several diseases, such as malaria, typhus, or dysentery, and many suffered from jungle rot on their feet, meaning that even the slightest movement was agony for the men. They were also lightly armed, undermanned, and their training did not lend itself to the type of combat they would face in an urban environment. Nevertheless, the 77th attacked the Japanese, who were dug in strength, and the fighting was vicious. In some instances, the men of the 77th fought the Japanese with their bayonets, kukris, and even their bare hands. But, despite the worsening monsoon season, rampaging disease, and the vicious Japanese resistance, Calvert's 77th finally took the town, with some last-minute help from Stilwell's Chinese nationalists. But the fighting, weather, and tough conditions had taken its toll, and less than 500 of the original 3,000 had made it through the campaign. To add insult to injury, the American Joseph Stilwell announced that Mogaung was taken by his Chinese forces, sending Calvert into somewhat of a rage. He radioed Stilwell's headquarters and informed them that the Chinese had taken Mogaung and his brigade would take umbrage. Legend has it that the American officers studied their maps for hours searching for the non-existent town, as the word umbrage is used when you have taken offence to something. Calvert, upon receiving orders to advance on yet another Japanese position, instead marched his unit to see Stilwell, who, upon seeing the condition of the remaining Chindits, finally relented and stood them down, the Chindits finally earning his respect. They then returned to India, and Calvert was given a bar for his Distinguished Service Order. The Chindits were finally stood down and disbanded. Calvert's war was not over, however. After returning to England for medical reasons, he was given command of an SAS brigade and sent to fight in the dying days of the war in the European theatre of operations. He took part in operations with the SAS in Holland and Germany, where he again served with distinction. He held command of his SAS brigade until October 1945, when it was finally disbanded. After the war, he served in the Allied military government in Italy, until he was given command of the Malayan Scouts in 1950, and he was headed for war once again during the Malayan Emergency. Some of the men in the Malayan Scouts were men he had served with in the wartime SAS, and though the unit was raised for the conflict in Malaya, they eventually became 22 SAS, the modern SAS Army Regiment. Calvert once again led his men on operations behind the lines until he was invalided and sent home on medical grounds in 1951. Upon his return, he was given a position in the British Army on the Rhine in Germany. While serving in Germany, he had a troubling relationship with alcohol, and he was dismissed from the army in strained circumstances after being found guilty of indecency with German men. Life after the army for Calvert was a struggle. He was plagued by alcoholism, and after failing to find work as an engineer in Australia, he returned to England again, where he began to write and lecture on guerrilla warfare and military history. Sadly, money troubles were an issue in later life, and he was forced to sell his medals to get by in 1997. Mike Calvert died in 1998, aged 85. That concludes today's video on Mad Mike Calvert. Thank you all for watching. If you did enjoy, drop me a comment, a like, and why not subscribe as well. And I'll see you all on the next one.